So hello and welcome to part 1 of my Blender Python tutorial series. In this part we're going to be looking at the scripting workspace, and this is where we're going to do all our scripting for the tutorial, and I'll also introduce you to what scripting actually looks like in Blender and the best way and the most efficient way to write code. Just one thing before we start, this isn't going to be a tutorial about how to actually use Blender. I'm assuming you have some prior knowledge. So for example, you know how to select different objects, or you know how to work around the interface and move objects and scale objects and all that. I'm not going to be covering that. So this is only on scripting. So yeah, let's begin. So to get to the scripting workspace in Blender 2.9, you can see that we have a bunch of presets for workspaces up along this bar. We have stuff for texture painting, for shading, for compositing, all this, but we're going to be working in the scripting space. This is what it looks like. Over here we have a text editor, as you can see. And here is where we're going to be writing our lines of code. You can see that it works like a normal Python, I guess, workspace where we have lines that we write code in, and it'll automatically detect, see our code right here. You can see it highlights the word if we type in a built-in Python command. And then over here, we don't really need this console view, but what we will need is this, I guess you could call it like context viewer, basically. So what it will do is it shows you the lines of code that Blender is running to execute the commands that we do in Blender. So for example, if we were to move this cube around with G and move it over here, then you can see it has just run a line of code to move that cube. So we're doing the manual inputs, and this is the code it's running in the background. You can also see, though, that certain types of commands don't run any lines of code. Like if we were to select an object here, it doesn't change anything, nothing updates. We could select the camera and still nothing updates. Moving stuff does, but again, if we press Ctrl Z, nothing updates. So this is the lines of code that we'll need to write and spend extra time figuring out together. Now, scripting in Blender can be quite a hard task, as it can get quite complicated, as you can see down here with the lines of code it's running. It's not intuitive at all. There's many things to remember. So the best way to execute a line of code in Blender is to do the command that you want to automate with code. So for example, if I wanted to add this cube back into our scene after I deleted it with delete, if I wanted to add the cube and run a line of code that would do that, what I should do is add a cube the manual way in the 3D viewport, like that, and let it run the line of code. But then after that, just copy and paste this line of code into our text editor. But before we copy and paste it right in, and I'll actually show you what would happen if we just put this straight into our text editor. If I were to run this, it would throw a thing and say the Python script failed. It would throw an error message. And the way we can get around this is by importing the Blender Python module. Because Python naturally doesn't recognize the BPY module, and so we'll need to import BPY in order to run this code. So every single line of code that you run in Blender must start with import BPY. And now if we were to run this line of code, we should probably delete this first so we can actually see it work. It would add in a cube to the scene. So this is basically as simple as it gets. One line of code that we've copied and pasted over from our context viewer and decided to put into the text editor. Now, if we wanted to change some of the parameters that this line of code has, such as the location or the scale, we would just need to tweak some or all of these values. So when you see a tuple like this with 3 numbers, it's always going to be x first, y second, and then z third. So x, y, and z. Same for the scale value here. So if we wanted to add this cube in, let's say 2 meters off the ground, all that we would need to do is just go to our Z value, because Z is always up, and type in 2. And what this would do is add the cube in, but you can see it's higher than it was before. 2 meters higher, in fact. And so that's, again, another really simple way to edit some of the parameters of this function. But there you go. Another thing that we will be looking at in this tutorial is adding in objects to the cursor. And this little red and white and black crosshair looking thing, this is the 3D cursor. And you can see that it's actually moving around 3D space when we click on it in the scene. Now it's attached to the cube. We can put it on the light and it would be attached to the light. And this is a really easy way of adding things into the scene without it being right in the center of the world, but wherever we want. Say we wanted to add a cube on top of this cube. Now it's not going to be precisely in the center of it, but close enough. Then if we were to add a cube in real life, then it would again be added on top of this other cube, if that makes sense. So the way we can get a script to add objects onto where the 3D cursor is align it to cursor, and we have this align value right here, and right now it's on world. So if we were to run this command, you would see that it adds the cube in right down here. It's aligning it to the world origin and not to the 3D cursor. So a nice simple way we can do this is change the world into cursor, and it should be in all caps. And now if we were to run this, and then we would need to get rid of our location values because we don't want it obviously coming in to the center 0, 0, 0. So all we need to do is just get rid of this other location value. Make sure you keep the scale the same. And if we were to run this line of code, you would see that the cube gets added up here. Now, right now the 3D cursor is off center. You can see that it's kind of sideways leaning here, which is why the cube was like imported in, added at such a weird angle. So to fix this, all we need to do is just strain the 3D cursor. So we want to go into top view here, and now if we shift right click to add the 3D cursor, we can see that it's perfectly straight now. So if we were to run the line of code again, there we have a cube added to the 3D cursor, and it's the right way up this time. So that's all you really need to know for this episode on how to script. It's as simple as taking the commands Blender is running, copying and pasting them in here, adding extra commands to make the script run seamlessly, and tweaking the values in order to get the result we want. Now in future episodes we'll be looking at the proper way to format this type of add-on into a nice button that might look like a slider like this, or a button that we can press to run the code. And that's all you really need to know for this tutorial. So in the next episode we'll be working on making our camera add-on, and I'll show you a preview of what we'll be making. Alright, thanks, and see you in the next episode.